For months, my wife acted like I was the one making our marriage hard. Then one day I stopped arguing, stopped asking, stopped chasing, and that was the first time she looked at me like she was actually afraid of losing something. Not because she loved me. Because I was no longer easy to control. My name's Derek. I'm 38, I work as a regional sales rep for an industrial supply company outside St. Louis, and for most of my marriage I thought effort was the answer to distance. If your wife got quiet, you checked in. If she pulled away, you leaned closer. If the house started feeling colder than it should, you didn't match that energy. You fought for warmth. You stayed steady until the version of her you loved came back through the door. That belief nearly made a fool out of me. My wife, Melissa, and I had been married for 9 years. No kids. Just the two of us in a brick ranch on a quiet street where everybody waved when they mowed the lawn and nobody ever admitted what was really happening inside their homes. Melissa worked in office administration for a private surgical practice. She was organized, sharp, good with people when she wanted to be. In the early years, she was warm in all the ways that actually matter. Not performative. Not loud. Just naturally close. She'd meet me in the kitchen when I got home, slide her arms around my waist while I loosened my tie, ask about my day like she actually wanted the long answer. At night she used to fall asleep half on top of me, one leg draped across mine like her body didn't know how not to reach for me. That version of her didn't disappear all at once. It faded in pieces. At first, I told myself it was stress. That's what men like me do when the marriage starts going bad in ways we can't explain without sounding weak. We protect the person hurting us with excuses before we protect ourselves with honesty. Melissa's job got busier. One of the surgeons took leave, the schedule got more chaotic, and suddenly every week seemed to bring a new reason she was drained by the time she got home. I believed it because parts of it were probably true. The lie wasn't that she had stress. The lie was that stress explained all of it. What changed first was the warmth. She stopped greeting me at the door. Then she stopped coming into the kitchen when I got home. Then she stopped asking about my day unless politeness cornered her into it. And even then, she'd nod halfway through my answer while checking her phone or rinsing a dish or moving mail around on the counter like my voice was just another sound in the house. The affection went next. No more casual touches walking by. No hand on my shoulder. No leaning into me on the couch. No brushing against me in bed unless I initiated, and even that started feeling like I was asking for too much. If I put a hand on her waist at night, she'd go still. If I kissed her neck, she'd sigh. If I tried to talk about the distance, she'd act like I had just assigned her one more emotional errand she didn't have time for. The bedroom turned into a dead zone after that. Not overnight. That would have been simpler. It happened through repetition. Too tired. Too stressed. Too much on her mind. Early morning tomorrow. Headache. Stomach cough. Every reason delivered with the same clipped little patience that made me feel childish for even wanting closeness from my own wife. I'm not talking about fireworks or some unrealistic idea of marriage. I'm talking about the basic human feeling of not wanting your spouse to react to your touch like it interrupts something better. I tried to handle it well. That's the part I still replay sometimes. How hard I worked to be reasonable. I gave her space. Picked up more around the house. Cooked more often. Suggested dinner out, then stopped suggesting when dinner out always seemed to feel like pressure. I brought her coffee on rough mornings. Booked a weekend reservation once at a bed and breakfast she had mentioned liking months earlier. She canceled 2 days before because she said the timing was bad and I needed to stop trying to force moments when life was already busy. That word stuck with me. Force. Like wanting one good weekend with my wife had become something aggressive. The disrespect got bolder after that. Not screaming matches. Melissa wasn't that kind of woman. Her cruelty came cleaner than that. Cooler. More controlled. She'd correct me in front of people over dumb little things that didn't matter. Roll her eyes when I told stories. Answer simple questions like I was slow for asking them. Once at dinner with her sister and brother-in-law, I made some harmless joke about Melissa always rearranging the furniture every 6 months, and she smiled into her wine glass and said maybe if I had better taste, she wouldn't have to keep fixing my choices. Everybody laughed. Including me. That's the thing about public disrespect. If you don't laugh with it, suddenly you're the guy who can take a joke. So you smile. You let it slide. Then later you lie awake next to the person who made you smaller in a room full of people and realize she never once looked over to see if it hurt. I brought that one up later in the car. She told me I was too sensitive lately. That became one of her favorite lines. The others were predictable too. I was reading too much into things. I was making everything heavy. I was exhausting. I turned small moments into big emotional dramas. Every time I tried to talk about the actual problem, somehow we ended up discussing the inconvenience of my reaction to it instead. And for a while, I let that work on me. I'd apologize after arguments I didn't start. Tell myself maybe I was coming in too intense. Maybe I was making her feel cornered. Maybe if I asked less, needed less, expected less, she'd feel safe enough to come back on her own. She didn't. She got meaner in quieter ways. One night, I came home from a 2-day work trip and found her on the couch with a blanket and her laptop open. I set my bag down, bent to kiss her, and she turned just enough that I caught the side of her face instead of her mouth. Then she sighed and said she had been enjoying the peace and didn't want to reset the mood with a bunch of needy energy the second I walked through the door. I remember standing there in my own living room with the taste of airport coffee still in my mouth, trying to decide whether I had actually just heard my wife describe my presence as needy energy. Another time I asked if everything was okay between us, and she said, "You know what your problem is? You keep chasing reassurance like it's my full-time job to keep you emotionally stable." That one sat in my chest for days. Because once a woman starts talking to her husband like that, the marriage has already changed shape in a way most men don't want to admit. Still, I kept trying. Not loudly. Just enough to keep humiliating myself slowly. Then came the night I stopped. It wasn't some huge betrayal scene. No dramatic message on a phone. No lipstick on a collar. Nothing that clean. It was a Tuesday in early November. Cold outside. I got home late after a long drive back from Springfield, tired enough that all I really wanted was food, a shower, and 1 hour of peace before bed. Melissa was in the kitchen at the counter eating salad out of a bowl and scrolling her phone. I said hey. She said hi without looking up. I asked how her day went. She shrugged and said busy. Then I opened the fridge and saw the takeout container from a place we both liked, enough for one person and already half empty. I asked if she had eaten without me. She looked up then, annoyed already, and said yes, because she was hungry and didn't realize she needed my permission to have dinner in her own house. That wasn't what I had asked. I told her I was just asking. She laughed once and said that was exactly the issue, that every just asking from me came loaded with some emotional test she was too tired to take anymore. Then she added, honestly, Derek, being around you lately feels like work. That was it. Not because it was the cruelest thing she'd ever said. Because something about the flatness in her voice made it final. She didn't say it in anger. She said it like a fact she had grown too comfortable carrying. Like whatever shame should have stopped her from speaking to her husband that way had already burned off long ago. And for the first time in months, I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain my tone. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't try to rescue the conversation before it got uglier. I just nodded once, closed the fridge, and made myself a sandwich without saying another word. That seemed to throw her off. She kept glancing at me while I stood at the counter. Waiting, I think, for the usual pattern. The question. The pushback. The hurt look. The attempt to fix what she had just broken with one sentence. When it didn't come, the room changed. I could feel it. Melissa shifted in her chair, set her phone down, then picked it back up again. Finally she asked if I was seriously not going to say anything. I told her no. Just that. No. Then I took my plate to the den, ate in front of a game I didn't care about, showered, and went to bed without reaching for her. That was the first night in a long time I didn't try. No touch. No conversation. No hoping. No silent negotiation with myself about whether this would be the wrong or right moment to ask for the smallest sign I still had a wife instead of a critic with a house key. And the strange part was, Melissa noticed immediately. She asked if I was okay twice the next morning. Twice. Not because she suddenly cared how I felt. Because for the first time in months, she couldn't feel me chasing her anymore. The shift lasted less than a day before Melissa started testing it. That was the first thing I noticed. She didn't soften. She didn't come to me with some late realization that maybe she'd crossed a line the night before. No apology. No awkward attempt to reset the tone. What she did instead was keep poking at the old pattern, like she couldn't quite believe I had stepped out of it that easily. Wednesday morning, she stood in the kitchen with her coffee and asked if I was mad at her. Not because she sounded worried. Because she sounded irritated by the uncertainty. I told her no. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. Then I grabbed my keys, kissed the cat on the head because he was weaving around my ankles, and left for work without filling the silence in for her. That unsettled her more than any argument would have. Before that night, Melissa always had something to push against. If she rolled her eyes, I'd ask what that was about. If she made a cutting comment, I'd try to address it. If she pulled away, I'd still be the idiot looking for some version of closeness in the wreckage. The whole rhythm of our marriage had started depending on me chasing repair while she decided whether to grant any of it. The second I stopped, the balance changed. Not dramatically at first. Just enough to feel. That evening, I came home and found her in the living room pretending to watch one of those real estate shows she liked. Usually I'd sit down and try to make conversation, maybe ask about her day, maybe absorb whatever mood she brought into the room and work around it. This time I changed clothes, heated leftovers, and ate in the kitchen. She came in twice while I was at the counter. The first time to get water. The second time to ask if I wasn't hungry enough to sit at the table. I told her I was fine where I was. She stood there a second longer than necessary, waiting again. For irritation maybe. A complaint. Something. When none came, she went back to the couch. Later that night in bed, I rolled to my side and stayed there. No reaching. No trying. No restless little touches meant to remind her we were still married. Around 10 minutes after the lamp went off, she asked if I was tired. I said yeah. Then she asked if everything was okay at work. That one almost made me laugh, because suddenly she had questions. Suddenly she could feel the absence of effort she had spent months training me into, and now that it was gone, she wanted to know what had changed. Not because she missed me. Because she missed being the one who decided when connection mattered. I told her work was fine. She lay there quietly after that, and for the first time in a long time, I could feel her attention on me in the dark. Not warmth. Awareness. That became the pattern over the next week. Melissa started noticing me. Not in loving ways. In suspicious ones. If I stayed later at the office than usual, she asked why. If I came home and went straight to the den instead of orbiting her mood in the kitchen, she'd wander in 20 minutes later with some fake practical question about dinner or laundry or whether I had seen her charger. Not because she needed the answer. Because she needed contact she hadn't had to ask for before. One night she made pasta and actually plated mine before I got downstairs. That had not happened in months. I thanked her, sat down, ate, and didn't turn it into anything bigger than dinner. That seemed to bother her too. Because the old me would have read it as a sign. Proof she was thawing. A reason to lean back in and test whether we could find our way to each other again. Instead, I just ate and went to the garage afterward to reorganize tools I didn't really need to reorganize. When I came back in, she was standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed. She asked if I was avoiding her. I said no. She asked what exactly this whole thing was then, because I had been weird ever since Tuesday. There was that word again. Weird. The label people use when your behavior stops serving them and they need to make it sound irrational before you get too comfortable in it. I told her I was just tired. She stared at me for a second like she knew I was using the same kind of non-answer she had fed me for months and hated what it felt like on the other side. Then she said, "You don't get to punish me with silence just because I was honest." That one landed in an interesting way, because buried inside it was the part she didn't mean to say out loud. She knew Tuesday had changed something. She knew I heard her clearly. And more than that, she could already feel that I was no longer scrambling to win back the version of her that kept treating me like a burden. I told her I wasn't punishing her. I was listening. That shut her up for a second. Then she laughed once, dry, and said if this was my new approach, it was childish. Maybe it was. Maybe not. But what I knew for sure was this: the more emotionally quiet I got, the more Melissa started losing her footing. She had built the whole dynamic of our marriage around my reaction. My hurt. My effort. My willingness to keep begging for scraps of softness from a woman who had gotten too comfortable deciding when I deserved any. Without that, she didn't seem to know which version of me she was dealing with. And that made her watchful. I started noticing it in small things first. She checked where I was in the house more often. Asked if I was going out when I put shoes on, even if I was just taking trash to the bin. Hovered in doorways longer. Looked up quicker when my phone buzzed. Not because she suddenly became affectionate. Because once I stopped orbiting her, she started having to wonder where my attention had gone. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months I had lived with her emotional absence and all the quiet humiliations that came with it. The turned shoulders. The eye rolls. The clipped replies. The way she treated every attempt at closeness like one more item on her to-do list. Now, after just a few days of me pulling back, she was visibly unsettled. That told me more than any argument could have. It meant she had never actually wanted distance. She wanted control over distance. The first truly strange moment came the following Friday. Melissa texted around 4 saying she'd be late because the surgical office had some end-of-week scheduling mess and one of the doctors was apparently impossible when cases ran long. The explanation sounded polished, which by then had started meaning the opposite of reassuring. Still, I just wrote back, "Okay." She came home after 8. Usually if she got home that late, she'd drift through the door exhausted and ready to collapse into complaint. This time she walked in lighter than the text had prepared me for. Not glowing. Just sharper. More alert. She set her purse down, kicked off her shoes, and looked at me like she expected a question she could already swat away. I didn't ask one. I was sitting in the den half watching a baseball game and barely looked up when she came in. That seemed to throw her completely. She stood there with one shoe in her hand and said, "You're not even going to ask?" I asked what. She said where I'd been all night in that mocking little tone, quoting the kind of husband she'd spent months accusing me of being. I told her I figured if she wanted me to know, she would have said more in the text. The silence after that was long enough to feel. Then she went into the kitchen without another word. A minute later, I heard a drawer slam harder than it needed to. That was the moment I first understood how much my stillness was costing her. Not because she missed me. Because without my questions, she had to sit alone with whatever story she'd been preparing to manage. And once I understood that, I started watching more carefully. Not just her tone. Her patterns. The phone came up more now, not less. Always in reach. Always face down when she set it down near me. Picked up immediately if it buzzed. Once, while we were both in the car driving to her sister's place for dinner, it lit up in the cup holder and she grabbed it so fast it looked like reflex instead of thought. She saw me glance over and immediately said it was just office stuff. I hadn't asked. That mattered too. Because guilty people often answer the question they're afraid you're about to ask, not the one you actually said out loud. Her mood also had a new inconsistency to it. With me, she was irritated by the quiet. With the phone, she looked relieved by something. That contrast started nagging at me harder with every day. She could barely tolerate 3 minutes of unstructured conversation with her husband, yet somehow the thing in that screen could still pull softness out of her face fast enough to change her whole posture. By Sunday night, I was no longer asking myself whether my silence was changing the marriage. It was. The better question was why Melissa seemed so uneasy now that I wasn't chasing her anymore. And the answer I kept circling back to was uglier than I wanted it to be. Because people don't panic when you stop begging for love they plan to give back. They panic when you stop being useful to the lie they're still trying to hold together. Once I saw that, I stopped reacting to Melissa and started studying her. That was the point where the whole thing changed from pain to pattern. Up until then, even with all the coldness and disrespect, some part of me was still living inside the marriage emotionally. Hurt by it. Reaching toward it. Measuring my days by what version of her I might get when I walked through the door. But once I realized my silence was making her nervous, not sad, something in me detached enough to finally pay attention the right way. And what I saw was ugly. Melissa didn't miss me. She missed managing me. The more I pulled back, the more she started checking where I was, what I was doing, why I wasn't asking, why I wasn't pressing, why I wasn't playing the old role anymore. But in between those moments, when she thought I wasn't looking, her attention kept slipping somewhere else with almost embarrassing urgency. To the phone. To whatever lived in it. To the version of herself she could still access there even while the marriage at home was dying in front of her. I started noticing timing first. Her phone lit up most often late afternoon and late night. Not random little buzzes scattered through the day. Clusters. Patterns. Around 5:30, right when I'd normally be getting home or texting that I was on my way. Then again after 10, when we were supposed to be winding down for bed and she usually acted too exhausted to offer me more than one-word answers and a turned shoulder. It wasn't just frequency either. It was the way her whole body reacted. If we were in the same room and the phone buzzed, she'd try to stay casual about it, but the change still came too fast to miss. A sharpened attention. A softened mouth. A glance she tried to make look absent-minded even though it was anything but. She could sit across from me at dinner looking bored by my existence, then light up in a half-second because some message reached her from behind a black screen. That contrast became impossible not to see. One Tuesday night, I was in the kitchen rinsing out a plate when her phone vibrated on the counter beside her glass of wine. She reached for it fast, checked the screen, and smiled before she remembered I was 10 feet away. Then she killed the smile so quickly it almost looked painful. I asked if work was still bothering her. That wasn't really the question, and she knew it. She said yes, one of the surgeons had been impossible all day and the office was still sorting out some scheduling mess for next week. I nodded, dried my hands, and said nothing else. That bothered her more than if I'd challenged her. She sat there another minute, phone face down now, waiting for me to circle back. To ask who? To ask why she looked like bad office scheduling had just made her happy. When I didn't, she finally picked the phone back up and went into the hallway to call her sister. That part mattered. Because guilty people often create more explanation than the room actually asked for. I stayed at the sink and listened. Her voice was too low to catch every word, but I caught the tone. It wasn't family tone. Not really. Not relaxed the way she sounded with her sister, Tara. This was lighter. More charged. Closer to flirtation than comfort, even through a wall. At one point she laughed softly and said, "You're terrible." Not scolding. Pleased. By the time she came back into the kitchen, her expression had reset. I asked if Tara was okay. Melissa paused for half a second, then said yes, just dealing with some nonsense at work. That pause told me more than the lie did. After that, I started keeping notes. Nothing dramatic. Just a running list in my phone before bed or sitting in my truck outside work. Times she got weirdly lighter after office disasters. Evenings she came home late but not tired. Days she mentioned work stress and then smiled at her screen like somebody had just handed her oxygen. The more I wrote down, the less random the whole thing felt. Then I started looking backward. That was harder, because once I stepped out of my own feelings enough to really map it, I could see that Melissa's mood shifts had been following another rhythm for a while. Her sharpest irritation toward me usually came after I got too close to something. A simple question. A check-in text. Me noticing she was late. Me asking why she hadn't answered. And the cruelty had escalated exactly when my questions got more direct. That's what finally made the whole gaslighting pattern click into place. She wasn't calling me needy because she believed I was needy. She was calling me needy because that label let her shut me down fast whenever I wandered too near the truth. The first real break came on Thursday. Melissa had left for work early, and I was halfway through my coffee when I noticed her iPad still charging on the side table in the den. She usually took it with her if she thought she might need it for office scheduling or remote access stuff. This time she hadn't. I told myself to leave it alone. Then it lit up. Just once. A notification across the screen. No long message preview. Just enough. "Ryan, you good?" "He's still quiet?" I went completely still. Ryan. Not Tara. Not some female co-worker. Not office stuff. Ryan. And worse than the name was the second half. "He's still quiet?" There it was. Not just proof of another man. Proof that my change in behavior had become a topic between them. I stared at the screen until it dimmed again. My pulse had kicked hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Then I picked up the iPad. It wasn't locked. That surprised me more than it should have. Maybe she had gotten sloppy. Maybe she had started believing her own version of me so deeply that she no longer thought I had any edge left in me. Whatever the reason, the opening was there. I took it. The thread with Ryan wasn't long. Or maybe it had been and she had cleaned it. That's what it looked like to me. Gaps. Weird jumps in tone. Messages that felt like the middle of conversations, not the beginning. But there was enough. "Can't talk long. He's home. I swear he's acting different now. Maybe he finally got the hint." Then Ryan. Or maybe he knows more than you think. And Melissa. If he knew, he'd say something. He always does. That one hit hardest. Because it told me exactly how she saw me. Predictable. Reactive. Easy to manage because I always spoke as soon as I felt something. Easy to dismiss because she knew my patterns while I was still blind to hers. I took quick screenshots and sent them to myself. Then I deleted the sent notification, locked the iPad, and put it back exactly where it had been. By the time I stood up, my hands were steady again, but something inside me had gone colder than I knew was possible. Ryan wasn't just some emotional side channel. He was somebody who knew about me. Knew enough to ask if I was still quiet. Knew enough to understand my role in Melissa's life while I was still being treated like the difficult husband whose only crime was noticing his own marriage disappearing. When she got home that evening, I didn't confront her. That was the hardest part. She walked through the door talking about how one of the surgeons had thrown the whole schedule off and how everybody at the practice was paying for one man's ego. Same tired wife tone. Same perfectly reasonable stressed story. And now I could hear the structure of it. The cover. The way it gave her just enough emotional fog to explain why she'd be distracted, cold, hard to reach, impossible to pin down. I nodded in the right places, took the grocery bag she handed me, and asked if she wanted chicken or pasta for dinner. For just a second, she looked relieved. That relief made my stomach turn. Because now I knew what it meant. She thought the mask still worked. That night, lying in bed beside her while she texted under the blanket with the screen turned low. I wasn't wondering anymore whether there was somebody else. I was wondering how long Ryan had been hearing about me while I was still in the next room trying to save a marriage she had already started narrating to another man. The next morning, I already knew what I was going to do. Not the speech. Not the exact words. But the shape of it. I wasn't going to ask Melissa a dozen more questions and give her 12 more chances to turn truth into attitude. I wasn't going to hold up screenshots like evidence in a courtroom and let her start crying about privacy before we ever got to betrayal. I wasn't going to hand her the old version of me one more time. The one who reacted fast enough to be controlled. I was going to make her say it in a room where there was nothing left to hide behind. That Friday, I came home early. Not suspiciously early. Just early enough to beat her by maybe 40 minutes. I showered, changed clothes, and sat in the den with the TV on low and my phone in my hand, Ryan's name and those screenshots sitting behind the lock screen like a second pulse. The house was quiet in that weird late afternoon way suburban houses get before everybody returns to whatever version of family they're pretending to be. Melissa walked in at 6:12. I remember the exact time because I looked at the clock when the garage door started rattling up. She came through the kitchen carrying her tote and her lunch bag, keys between two fingers, face arranged in that tired, mildly put-upon expression she always wore when she needed the evening to start on her terms. She saw me in the den and hesitated for maybe half a second. Just enough for me to know she had been expecting to arrive to an empty room or at least to the easier version of me. Then she smiled. Small. Cautious. A test. "Hey," she said. I said hey back. She asked why I was home so early. I told her my last stop cancelled. Then I asked if she could come sit down for a minute. That was when the air changed. Not dramatically. She didn't freeze. Didn't drop her bag. Didn't suddenly look guilty. Melissa was too controlled for that. But I saw it. That tiny tightening around the eyes. That quick internal adjustment of somebody realizing the room might not belong to them tonight. She set her things down in the kitchen and came into the den, but she didn't sit right away. She asked what this was about. I told her I wanted to talk about Ryan. Everything in her face stopped. Not confusion. Recognition. That mattered more than anything she said after. Then came the first lie, exactly on schedule. She asked who Ryan was. I looked at her for a second and said, "Don't do that." That landed harder than I expected. Probably because I said it calmly. No anger. No wounded tone. Just final. She sat down after that, slowly, and folded her hands in her lap like she was trying to turn herself back into the reasonable one by posture alone. Then she asked where this was coming from. I told her the iPad had lit up. I told her I saw the messages. I told her I knew Ryan knew about me, knew I'd gone quiet, knew enough about our marriage to ask whether I was still quiet. I told her I was done being painted as paranoid for noticing things that were obviously real. She started crying before I even finished. That almost got me for 1 second. Not because I believed it changed anything. Just because it is always a shock seeing emotion show up so quickly after months of being treated like your own pain is too exhausting to acknowledge. But then I remembered the messages. The way she wrote about me. The way she said if I knew, I'd say something. Because I always did. She wasn't crying because she finally saw what she had done. She was crying because the script had broken. I asked how long. At first she said it was mostly emotional. That phrase made something dark move through me. Mostly emotional. Like there were percentages on betrayal. Like the category mattered more than the deception. I asked again. This time she said they'd been talking for around 5 months. It started through work. Ryan handled external vendor coordination for one of the surgical practices service groups. Calls became jokes. Jokes became lunches. Lunches became a place she started putting all the patience and attention she had stopped bringing home to me. Then I asked when it turned physical. That was the question she didn't want. She covered her mouth first. Looked down. Shook her head like the shape of the truth itself was too ugly to say in one clean line. Then she whispered, 6 weeks. 6 weeks. That number rearranged everything behind it. The blocking. The labels. The way she sharpened every simple question into an attack. The sudden panic every time I got too close to naming what was wrong. For 6 weeks, my wife had already been sleeping with another man while teaching me to doubt whether I was even allowed to ask why she was late. I asked if that was why she kept calling me needy. She cried harder at that. I asked if that was why I was controlling whenever I wanted a straight answer. Why I was paranoid whenever I noticed her phone lighting up. Why I was suffocating when I asked if she was coming home. Why every ordinary concern from a husband had to be turned into a flaw in my character. That was when she finally told the truth in the ugliest way. She said she panicked. Every time. She said when I asked simple questions, it felt dangerous because the questions were normal enough that she couldn't call them crazy without sounding cruel, so she got cruel anyway. She said if she pushed hard enough, fast enough, she could get me off balance before I stayed on one point too long. She said making me feel needy was easier than explaining why she had blocked her husband on a random Friday night. Easier than explaining why she smiled at her phone and went stiff when I touched her. Easier than admitting she had split herself into two versions and was only bringing the cold one home. That was the reveal. Not just that she cheated. Not just that Ryan existed. But that the cruelty had never been confidence. It had been panic. She wasn't dismissing my instincts because they were wrong. She was attacking them because they were right enough to scare her. And once she said that, I think something in both of us finally went still. Because there was no softer version of what she had done left to hide inside. I told her we were done. She started talking immediately after that. Counseling. Time apart. A mistake. A bad season. Confusion. She said Ryan had gotten in her head when things between us were already tense. She said she didn't think it would go this far. She said she hated who she had become. Maybe some of that was even true. It didn't matter. Because cheating was one betrayal. Gaslighting me until I apologized for noticing it was another one entirely. I told her to pack a bag and stay with her sister for now. That stunned her more than the confrontation had. I could see it on her face. She had prepared herself for pain, for anger, for pleading maybe. But not for clean consequences delivered by a man she had spent months treating as emotionally dependent on her approval. She asked if I was serious. I told her yes. Then I stood up and walked into the kitchen, not because I had anything to do there, but because I couldn't sit across from her another second listening to somebody negotiate the terms of damage she had already done on purpose. She left that night with one suitcase and red eyes and a face I would have once crossed any distance to comfort. I stood at the front window and watched her back out of the driveway onto the porch light, then disappear down the street like any other spouse heading somewhere temporary. Only this time, nothing about it felt temporary. The aftermath was quieter than the months leading up to it. No dramatic midnight calls. No plates thrown. Just legal appointments, separate accounts, family questions, and the long administrative death of a marriage that had already been emotionally decomposing for a while. Ryan disappeared fast once things were no longer secret, which told me everything I needed to know about him too. Men like that usually like the thrill more than the reality. What stayed with me wasn't even the affair itself. It was the months before. The way she made me apologize for normal concern. The way she weaponized words like needy and controlling until I almost stopped trusting my own instincts. The way she taught me to doubt myself so she could keep doing what she was doing in peace. Looking back now, the moment I stopped chasing wasn't the moment the marriage died. It was the moment I finally became hard to manipulate, and that was when her panic started showing through the cracks.